GBNews.uk. Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
And welcome to On the Money, the show where we cover economics, business and consumer news. This is the On the Money Christmas special. We're going to spend the next half hour looking back at the year that's just gone and looking forward to the year ahead. As ever with On the Money, we've assembled a panel of people who really know what they're talking about. Let me welcome Helen Thomas, CEO of Blonde Money, her own consultancy, former special advisor to somebody called George Osborne. Can't remember who he was. Justin Urquhart-Stewart, our very own Gordon Gekko on the money. He is the CEO of Regionally. You're going to be talking about all things financial. And, of course, Sir Christopher Mayer, another GB News regular. Great to have you with us, Sir Christopher. You are, of course, the former British ambassador to the United States. So let's have a think about the year that's just gone, Helen. We haven't had the growth numbers yet, but we're meant to be growing this year in 2021, according to Rishi Sunak's budget, by 6.5%, and next year by 6%. These seems like very aggressive numbers.
Well, I remember when we did our budget special, highlight of the last year, of course, at GB News, that we did, our mouths rather dropped when we looked at those numbers, because, yes, we don't exactly know for this year, but 6.5%, always very aggressive, but 2022, another 6%. We haven't seen those kinds of numbers in decades. It's like an emerging market nation. And frankly, there are so many headwinds. I think it's an absolute cert. I'm happy to tell you this on the record. You can get me back next year. We will not be growing anywhere near that level in 2022.
Justin, what do financial markets think about these growth assumptions? When the budget came out, we sort of took them on the nod, didn't we? The Office for Budget Responsibility, of course, had come up with these numbers, and we thought, well, maybe, maybe not. Since then, we've had all these supply chain issues. We've had a lot more inflation than some of us, not all of us, predicted. What do you think about these growth numbers?
Well, when we were talking about on the day, we went through all the little handouts that were going on, then we had the growth figures. This sounded like Gordon Brown's last budget, and it was just operating that way. It did not bear any that great connection to really what was going on. We will see a short-term bounce back, which we've already had. after that, it's going to be really painful and difficult. So I agree, we're not going to see those growth figures at all. So it lost credibility very quickly.
What's your impression of the last budget, Sir Christopher? It was a while ago now. A lot of people said it wasn't a Conservative budget. It introduced the highest level of government spending for 70 years, a huge amount of debt. I thought Rishi Sunak was a self-styled Thatcherite.
Well, I thought it actually sounded a bit like a neo-New Labour budget. And I thought someone's been listening to Tony Blair, of blessed memory, and it's not just the Labour Party of today, but it also one or two Conservatives also who have seen a way of occupying the middle ground to take them through the 2024 election. Well, that's the one in America, but it's somewhere around that time, isn't it?
Certainly is. Helen, what happens if we don't grow next year by 6%, as the budget assumes that we will? Then a lot of the public finances look a lot weaker than they already are. Possibly even more tax rises, possibly less government spending than we've already penciled in.
Well, that really does paint the government into a corner then, actually, because as you say, really difficult decisions. You feel like Rishi Sunak sat there with his spreadsheet trying to make sure all added up. He could do a few giveaways here, but plough that furrow towards a more sustainable debt path. But I think I might get whoever said this quotation wrong, Muhammad Ali, but you know what? It's always a great plan until you get punched in the face. And frankly, that's what we keep getting. And I think, it's COVID, it is the technological revolution, the way we're living and everything online. Our behaviour has changed. We are doing things differently. Eventually, we'll get into a more settled growth path, and some of it will be really good. But it's going to be inefficient. That means growth will be lower than would otherwise be the case. And that creates a political dilemma of exactly the one you've talked about there, which is after throwing all this money at all the problems, what are you going to do when the numbers don't add up?
We were looking really good economically in the summer, weren't we? And GB News, On the Money, we're generally an optimistic bunch. But it must be said, with the best will in the world, Justin, as we've gone into the autumn and then into the winter, the fourth quarter, if you like, of 2021, the economic outlook has got a lot gloomier.
The figures started changing, and suddenly realising actually those numbers we heard before just didn't seem to live up to it. But also, this is an item you've focused on immediately, inflation was coming back. And so the Treasury say it's inflation, it's just an annual thing, it'll wash off. But how much is actually embedded? And so Rishi Sunak has never seen inflation. Those of a certain age will remember double-digit inflation. We got positively Brazilian, in inflation terms, getting up to 25%. And that is really dangerous. If you start getting a stagnating economy with inflation, you end up with the old inflatable deer of stagflation.
So, Christopher, we've talked on the money about the possibility of a winter of discontent. I'm just about old enough to remember the late 70s. It was the Callaghan government where we had, at one point, 20-25% inflation, a lot of trade union unrest, a lot of dysfunction, a lot of wage claims, pushing up prices across the economy. Do you think it's hyperbole to say, to some extent, we're in the midst of, or we're facing, as we go into January and February, a winter of discontent here in the UK again?
I can't imagine that this winter is going to be a reenactment of what we went through in the end of 73, 74, 75, because that was a period, leave aside the economics, of national humiliation.
Yeah.
The pound was plummeting when we cared about those things. We seem to care much less about them nowadays. In 74, after the first Wilson victory over Edward Heath, got a pay rise as a civil servant of over 30%.
In a single
30?
year.
30.
Unbelievable.
And I thought, yippee, I had all this money coming in, and it just disappeared
Just
like...
vaporised
It
in
just
your
vaporised like
hands.
snow in the sun.
People don't remember inflation, do
well,
they?
they don't, and that is the thing that worries me. That if you don't remember inflation, you don't think it's going to come. And when it does come, it whacks you across the stage.
And particularly those people with their pensions, and they've probably cashed in their pension, they've now got a fixed sum coming through every month,
That's right.
and it devalues. And in the 70s, you saw a lot of people there, their wealth just being eroded. And
Can
there was
I
nothing
be
they do about it.
controversial and
You
throw
don't remember the
another?
70s.
I don't remember
Imagine
the
how
70s.
controversial I'd have been if I'd have said, do you remember the 70s, Helen?
I couldn't have allowed that one.
Not
But-
for your Christmas card list.
yeah, well, that's
For
certainly
me,
the
it's
case.
like yesterday.
But here's the thing, for me, me, I look back at the last couple of decades and say we were all panicked about deflation and disinflation, right? And particularly
That's
the
when
euro.
prices maybe fall, when the
Yes.
economy's going so slowly
Yes.
that prices actually go backwards.
And actually, it's been a potential issue for Japan for a long period. That there's a problem. There is a problem with deflation, which is, it turns into a situation where no one spends, because why would you spend today if it's a bit cheaper tomorrow or next week, and then nobody ever spends, and you get that is actually a worse problem, I think, for policymakers to deal
It's always
with.
issue. Everyone's desperate to try and get sort of the Goldilocks, neither too hot nor too cold, and it's very difficult to achieve. It easily swing off it.
And that's why the Bank of England, of course, has this 2% inflation target and has had it for a very long time. But we're way above that now. We're at 4-5% inflation. In Germany, they've got 6% inflation. In the States, they've got 6% inflation as we film this discussion. Do you fear that we could go back to the really big inflation of the 70s?
I mean, I'm no economist. I'm no businessman. I'm no captain of industry. But the thing that worries me more than anything else is you have all this quantitative easing.
All that money printing by the central
All
bank.
that money printing going on, and then your own government buying it and then flogging it off again as bonds or whatever happens to this cash. Sooner or later, and you tell me, you guys, isn't this going to erupt like a massive boil, and vroomf, and that will be in the form of the kind of inflation that we had in the early 70s. Not this winter, but sooner or later that must come down the track.
Yeah, you look at so much a winter of discount discount tents.
It's been on the sherry.
Well, already. But they had, it'll be with spring, when suddenly the cap comes off those gas prices and people look at their fuel bills and go, whoa, hang on a second, what's happened?
Indeed, we had one lifting of the price cap, didn't we? 4 households in October, and we've got another one in April. But businesses don't have capped energy prices. The reason why we had such big inflation in the early 70s was you had the first oil price spike. You had the Yom Kippur War. You had a lot of turmoil in the Middle East. You had oil prices rocketing. We've seen fuel prices go up a lot in recent months, Helen. They're sort of bouncing around at the moment as the Omicron variant has come into view. We don't know what's going to happen with that, but oil prices have come off, as we've been discussing on the Money show pretty much every day. But if we have these high fuel prices going into commerce, that doesn't just lead to higher fuel bills for households, even though because the price cap will go up quite a lot. But firms don't have any price cap at all. You're going to see lots of firms close down, our steel makers, our manufacturers.
There's no doubt there's going to be a squeeze on margins. Yes, the fact that costs coming into a business are going up, and then the question is, can they pass it on to a consumer? How strong is that consumer? Can they take it? Now, I do want to take a more optimistic tone on this, though, which is, as I said, there has been that period of lower prices. If we get some inflation, some wage inflation, I hear, 30% is punchy, and I understand it disappeared, but goodness me, after the last 20 years, if people start getting 5-6%, I mean, great. Not good if it ends up at 30% plus and that ends up, spiralling on. But I would argue our global economy is differently structured now to the 1970s. And there are and have been very big disinflationary forces like cheap labour in China, etc. That
less trade unionisation
and technology. Computers are much cheaper, clothes are getting cheaper, etc. Now, I'm not denying that. What we've gone through now, the supply chains are going to change. People are going to, de-globalise. They're going to bring things onshore. Localise. That's a much better word. Thank you. Which will make things slightly more expensive. But if we all get a little bit richer and it gets a little bit more expensive, well, I don't see that as a big issue.
In our discussions on the money, you have generally been a bit more dovish, as we say, in terms of inflation. You, Justin, have been a bit more hawkish, as I have been. We think the idea that inflation will be transitory is the Bank of England making excuses for not putting up interest rates. Do you buy what Helen just said? She makes a persuasive argument that inflation might not be around for as long as some of us think.
We have to look at the makeup of what is actually creating this inflation. The bit that will be pass on and comes off at the end of 12 months are those price rises you've seen coming through for commodities and things like that. They've gone up and they're not going to go up by the same percentage again. So we've already had that bit. The difference between the 70s and now, particularly with this, was wages. The trade unions are much more powerful. They could actually really make a really difficult time for the economy. But we're not in that situation anymore. The question is how much of this is actually going to be embedded. And the bit I didn't like, talking to manufacturers, where they were talking about input inflation and running at over 10 to 11%.
The price of materials that factories have to buy, the price of labour that firms have to take on, those prices get passed on,
and
don't they?
their future outlook from that with more rises to come. So they don't drop off after 12 months. They think this is actually a change they're going to have to suffer.
Just remind us, Sir Christopher, give us the benefit of your experience, shall we say.
As what?
Remind us the extent to which, once inflation gets 7, 8, 9%, even higher, how it upends politics, how it completely takes over the political agenda.
Well, what it did was it wrecked the Callaghan government. And I think inflation and the problems with the unions led to Margaret Thatcher's victory in 1979. So it can be a government upsetting, defeating phenomenon if it goes in a certain way. One of the big headwinds, massive headwinds, is the geopolitics that surround all this in the global economy. We have to realize that the way geopolitics is going today, and it's going to hell in a handcart, to be perfectly frank with you, where we're seeing almost a 19th century revival of competition between global powers, between the big powers. They are globalization, supply chain cutting things.
Yeah.
So we're seeing this now between the United States and China. Even on a tiny scale, Brexit has cut into supply chains. So the headwinds of geopolitics push against the lovely globalization we enjoyed at the beginning of the century.
What you're saying is, as competition between the US and China and their various spheres of influence gets more intense, as it has become more intense, the fallout from COVID is part of that. The cooperation upon which the global economy depends could start to break down, and that could start to impact living standards here in the Western world and beyond.
Well, that could indeed happen, but there's a great conundrum with China. And it is this. It is already embedded in our economies because we've had over a decade of fairly close cooperation with Chinese investment, Chinese technology. We've just assumed we were always going to be superior to the Chinese and we could reach out to them for cheap labor. Actually, their labor is not particularly cheap anymore, and you go elsewhere.
Right.
I think I'm right in saying
Vietnam,
that.
Thailand.
So, yeah, exactly. What we, when I say we, I mean we the West, we the UK, we the US, we the EU, have not yet decided whether China is a partner or a competitor or an enemy. And until we have made up our minds which of those three things it is, to which the answer is it is all three, which makes policy even harder, we're going to find the kind of facile nature of globalization no longer easy.
So, Christopher, may I hold that thought? You're saying such exciting things. The cops are coming to get you. But after the break, we're going to carry on this discussion on the money about what happened in 2021, what's going to happen in 2022. Stay with us. You're on the money.
You're the first in your family to go to university, so whatever challenges your childhood presented, it didn't stop you going to university. How did you find it?
Never felt like a student. I was always like a townie who was doing a degree and a little bit apprehensive about it. None of my friends really had gone to university. They're all trained as plumbers and electricians and that kind of thing. And it was completely not what I expected, a lot more down to earth. And I studied politics, so you can decide whether that was useful or not.
You say you played hard and you worked hard. You did your schoolwork too. You get into Oxford.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know. But I just was like a fish out of water, like, for most of it, to be honest. Although I did make some really good friends there.
Why were you a fish out of water?
State educated, northern girl doing science. And the work is really, really hard. It's completely different. What I realised was everybody else had had a lot of coaching, a lot of extra tuition, a lot of support. There was no teaching, really. It's just like, here's an exercise book, get on with it. Crushed my confidence immediately, which, having gone from being this sort of clever, like, oh, you're out of 2,000 kids in this sixth form college in Manchester, we want you to sort of apply for, I was the only one who got in out of that, to basically being made to feel like I was totally thick, is quite crushing.
Did your parents separate when you were young? Do you know your dad?
They separated when I was 10. My father left home for, strangely, with a woman round the corner. I have to say it's probably it made things more difficult financially, but it also made me probably appreciate what I've actually had, what I then had in the future, so to speak. So.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. This is our Christmas special. We're discussing economic, business and consumer trends in 2021 and looking forward to 2022. My panel is still with me here. Helen Thomas, CEO of Blonde Money, Justin Urquhart-Stewart of Regionally, and of course Sir Christopher Mayer, former British ambassador to the United States. Helen, we were discussing China before the break. You used to work for George Osborne. He certainly believed in this golden age between Britain and China. It's slightly changed since then, hasn't it?
Well, it's changed an awful lot, hasn't it, since then? And you have to say that there was a clear Cameron-Osborne agenda to get close to China, to get the investment. I mean, there was all sorts of initiatives on that front. But geopolitics can change on a dime. I think it's fascinating to question how is the UK going to approach China. I think Hong Kong, perhaps we should mention, because clearly there's been this bid to, offer for the Hong Kong British National Overseas come over here. There's so much that could rub everybody up the wrong way. The triangulation of it is going to take some very serious diplomats. I wonder if we do have them. Quite clear they're not in number 10 from what I can tell.
Justin, the idea that COVID began in a lab in Wuhan and then escaped, not escaped because it was aggressively, pushed onto the world, but because there was incompetence and ineptitude, in places like the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which the West partly funded, you often end up investigating viruses for very legitimate reasons, to see how they spread and to try and build vaccines. But what do you make of the state of relations between the West and China? China, which, by the way, under certain definitions, is now the biggest economy in the world. Financial markets have to take a view about the possible geopolitical fallout that Sir Christopher was referring to before the break.
Well, in those days gone by, we had that lovely symbiotic relationship. We sort of needed each other. They needed us because they needed the trade, America especially, their largest trading partner, but at the same time, the Americans actually, well, they need the Chinese to keep buying the debt. Someone's got to buy the stretched paper. And the bit that's going to really hit us in 22 is the loss of that vital word in any economy, confidence. Because if we can't see where this relationship's going, then people will just hold back and say, well, I'm going to wait until something's clearer. This is the vital moment when you need investment going into businesses of all sizes, and giving them a perfect excuse saying, on a geopolitical basis, we're worried about what's happening in China, therefore I'll hold back till I can see where the growth comes from.
And to Helen's point, if a significant number of very wealthy, highly successful Hong Kong entrepreneurs are leaving Hong Kong, which of course is now part of China, coming to the UK, going to Canada, where many of them will go, I'm sure, going to America, the Chinese aren't going to like that, are they?
Oh, it's a perfect opportunity, isn't it, to actually sit there and say, look, what we've been investing in your country, by the way, we can reverse this if we so wish to. And you have to look at the student population, all of those elements. We've had a huge level of investment and joint investment going through. The Belt Road investment plan that's been going through, which to us doesn't really, we just see part of it. You go to Africa and you go around the Commonwealth countries, this looks like a form of neo-colonialism, particularly when you get the second and third wave of Chinese investment coming through, and suddenly you find actually the ownership of some of these projects are now moving away from the country because they're not paying the interest, which has suddenly gone up, and it's now owned by the Port of Shanghai.
Very interesting. So, Christopher, back in mid-2020, a while ago, as we were going into lockdown, somebody who you'll know well, Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of British intelligence, extremely legitimate voice, he gave an interview where he said that he felt that COVID may well be an engineered escapee from a lab rather than jumping from an animal to a human, with no human intervention. What are the implications if that's true? Because that was seen as a conspiracy theory. It was seen as a mad idea. Now the World Health Organization, the Pentagon, the US State Department, a lot of very respected organizations think that may be the case. What are the geopolitical implications if that is the case?
Well, you only need the suspicion to be there to create damage in the relationship. I think people really know about these things like Matt Ridley, who's written a lot about it.
Yeah, the journalist and scientist who's just written an excellent book on the origins of COVID.
And I think his verdict, and I'd rest with him because he knows a damn sight more about it than I do, is that we'll never be able to prove whether it's zoonotic, I believe is the right word, or whether it was artificially engineered in a laboratory and escaped either inadvertently or deliberately. But what we can say, I think, with all certainty, is that the Chinese obscured the facts immediately afterwards, and maybe continue to do so. Now, that does not create the confidence of which you speak. And then there's something else to bear in mind. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, everything's on the negative side at the moment, almost everything. Is that as we try and follow up COP26, to which the Chinese contribution was, how can we put it, lukewarm at the very best, it is going to get to net zero, you're going to need much more electric vehicles, stuff like that, and you're going to need certain minerals, like cobalt,
the rare
lithium,
earths,
and
for those batteries, for those electric vehicles.
And who is the big power in the Democratic Republic of the Congo at the moment, which is one of the major sources of cobalt, but the Chinese Republic. So I think what we haven't thought about either is the geopolitics of COP26, which is going to exacerbate competition between the great powers rather than ameliorate it.
See, whenever he speaks, the cops come. He's so interesting. Now he's free from civil service constraints. So Christopher mentioned COP26, of course, a big event of the autumn that we've just seen. The Chinese didn't really turn up, certainly not the big guns from China. How do you assess the politics of COP26, Helen? What we've been covering on the money over recent weeks and months is the fact that the cost implications are now coming to the fore. Ordinary men and women, ordinary people running businesses who have to replace vans, have to replace the boilers in their houses. They're now starting to see, even though the Treasury is being very vague about the costs, that this is going to cost a lot of money and a lot of the burden is going to fall disproportionately on less well-off households.
Well, I think that one of our themes for the year ahead has been inspired by the recent government in Germany. We've said going left and going green. That's sort of the way the pendulum is swinging, even if you've got a notionally right-wing government, as we have in the UK. I'm talking, about the general political mood, which has been spend, perhaps get your central bank to buy that debt.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it too much. And green, we've got to do it. Now, I think what we are starting to see is, as you say, that the real cost of that to the man on the street only just starting to come through. Politically, then you face a question of how honest are you going to be with people? It's not the monetary cost, it's the disruption. If you want to put a heat pump in your house, it's not just a case of flicking a switch between your boiler. You know, these are it's massive change. Now,
27 million houses across the UK. You're going to put a heat pump in everyone?
But one that may need to be done. I mean, I go back to thinking about, I guess, the 1910s, 1920s. People would have... let's look back at that, OK? Let's look back at the streets of London, paved with horse manure from the horse and carts. And we look back and say, that's disgusting. How can they do that? And then, of course, the car comes along and revolutionises things. So I think we also should say revolution always does come at a cost. We can't avoid that, but the politicians have to understand how to make that a palatable message to the public, because that reality, going left, going green, that's going to be with us for decades.
In the financial world, people are investing, aren't they? They're investing in renewables, they're investing in wind and solar. They're starting to reinvest in nuclear, which is seen increasingly to be part of the net zero solution. They're investing in hydrogen. What did you make of COP26,
Well,
Justin?
it's the moment where we have to, in the investment terms, can it be credible? We're going to see an awful lot of greenwash going on, which is a nice way of actually saying companies lying. So there is no such thing as an oil company anymore. There's now an energy management company, which will be carbon neutral and a date in the future, which by the time we get it, you will have forgotten. And so we're seeing a lot of companies.
You're so cynical, I can't stand it.
But we've seen certain companies like Legal & General saying we will only be investing in companies which are adopting ESG, ethical, sustainable, and with good governance.
Yeah.
But prove it. You know, to most people, ethics is a sort of East Anglian county.
Yeah.
They really don't understand it. That's what I mean. So is that green or is that green? Am I investing in it, or am I just creating a lovely charade? There's going to be an awful lot of that going on.
From where I stand, I think most people in the UK, they want less pollution. They want a cleaner world for their kids and grandkids to inherit. We kind of get that in the end, fossil fuels will run out, so probably we should wean ourselves off them, but it's going to take a while. What did you make of this, Sir Christopher? You've been to many, many summits. You've been in the back rooms when the communiques are being stitched together at 4 a.m. and so on. What did you make of the final statement that came out of COP26? Do you think it was a successful summit?
I thought, on the basis of all the international conferences I have been to, it didn't come out too badly. But that's a fairly low bar, to be perfectly honest with you. And the bilateral agreement between the Americans and the Chinese on whatever, I've even forgotten what it was about now. You know.
Close cooperation or something.
Was it something to do with carbon emissions?
Yes.
Coal mines, I can't remember. Yeah, that was all okay, but in a way it is useful to have these giant jamborees, great diplomatic jamborees, because it shows you the falseness of multilateral diplomacy. And what I mean by that is it didn't matter a toss, except in presentational terms, whether President Xi of China, came to Glasgow. I can see why he didn't.
When he said she, I thought he meant Greta.
No. President Xi, I've got to get my pronunciation right here. Because China's position would have been decided and endorsed by the President Xi before the thing started. And it didn't matter whether there was a first secretary, a councillor, whoever was sitting in the chairman of the delegation's chair, the policy would have been the same. It was actually to China's advantage that Xi stayed away. Interesting. Because he would have suffered horribly from the other Xi, Greta.
Imagine that.
Can you imagine that?
We're coming to the end of our time, Helen, so let's just round up. Looking forward, at the time of recording, we don't know the seriousness of the Omicron variant. We should say that. We don't know if the UK is going to go into lockdown. It doesn't look as if it will, but there is a nervousness. Mask wearing widespread will obviously impact investment decisions, the way people consume in the run-up to Christmas and beyond. What do you foresee in 2022 in terms of the pandemic and in terms of the economy? Because as people that study economics and look at financial trends, you can't think of anything without thinking of COVID and our reaction to it.
Absolutely right. And we should take the certainty that this virus will be with us for 2022 and the year after and the year after that, because that's how viruses work. I think I mentioned the other day to you, look, the Spanish flu is still with us. It does still exist.
That was 1918.
Exactly. So,
and it started in Kansas.
Exactly, yeah. Yes, the Spaniards were delighted, weren't they, that they got their name on that. You don't need to be a scientist to know that. That's how viruses operate. What you do need to be is someone who understands human behaviour, and I think we have all changed. Now, some people may admit that more to themselves than others, but we might shop more online. We might prefer not to do the commute. We might not actually like big, noisy restaurants, or, maybe we'll do one festival a year or one concert and not all the time. It's changed us. Of course it has. I mean, I find it hilarious that we sit here and think, oh yeah, it's going back to normal, it's going back to normal. We have all just undergone a huge historical event of massive psychological importance, as was the war, as was, other big issues like pandemics. So we should embrace that. We should embrace the change. It's going to mean we live in a more virtual world, which was happening anyway because we're in a technological revolution.
Lots more Zoom, lots more online
and it's going to get better. Zoom is going to look like the fax machine. In the future, we'll probably, we might well be doing this as holograms.
But most of the population, they don't work on their laptops in their nice conservatories in their big house.
There is something in that, Liam, that's for sure.
A big proportion of the economy, they're hands-on. They work in restaurants, they work in factories, they work on building sites, they drive taxis.
There are some things you cannot do virtually, but what I'm trying to get at here is to say that basically the economy, all the pieces of jigsaw puzzle thrown up in the air, we're all acting like they're back down again, but they're not. Some of them are still tumbling, some of them are refitting and finding it doesn't work, or they're realising, well, we don't need 20% of the staff we used to have, or we do and we need to pay them 20% more. These are huge economic changes, and so it's going to make things more inefficient, growth will be lower.
A new normal, Justin, for households, for firms, for investors?
It's going to be new, I don't think it's going to be normal, but what's going to be interesting is companies are learning to live with this now. Over the past 2 years, you've seen how they've adjusted, how they've changed, and been able to adjust whether it's their supplies, may increase, as we talked about earlier, localization, and businesses still setting up. I'm amazed at it is bravery of people going out saying, I'm now going to set up a business in the face of this pandemic, and the fact maybe another lockdown coming through, that's what they're going to have a go and try and do it without government money. And this is what I find so fascinating. Bear in mind, Britain, we set up more businesses in this country than Germany and France put together. We're really good at starting them.
And there's been a huge increase in business creation since lockdown.
Which has been great. Well, I'm rubbish at financing them in their growth, but that's another issue. But the positive line is I'm seeing a lot more of this localization of manufacturing and other service businesses, which otherwise would have been done elsewhere, and people have taken the initiative to change. That's what we've got to support.
So, Christopher, when future historians look back on this year, on COVID, on lockdown, what will they say?
They'll say COVID was rough for the generation that had to go through it for however many years, but it was as nothing compared with previous generations who suffered centuries of the plague, typhus, typhoid, smallpox, and Christ knows how many other diseases, more or less, we've got under control.
By the way,
in
living memory.
We haven't got rid of them either. But I was thinking the other day that Queen Victoria's husband died of either typhoid or typhus. I can never remember what it was, and that was one of the things that led to the creation of sewers going around London to take the waste and effluent that was causing these diseases. But previous generations suffered far more than we are doing or have done since COVID began. And the thing that gives me a positive, you've inspired me, Justin. the thing that makes me feel a bit more positive, actually, after all, is COVID comes along and we devise and administer vaccines at a pace never seen before. And when adversity comes, there is something in the human spirit that says, bugger this, can I say that? We will overcome this. And the ingenuity that lasts years to bring to a fruition in 2 months produces something. That is where hope rests.
Well, I'm glad we've rounded off this discussion on a positive note. It's been a tough discussion, but we've had a tough year, and hopefully we'll have a much better year in 2022, both the UK and the rest of the world. So thanks for joining me, my expert panel, Helen Thomas, Justin Urquhart-Stewart, and Sir Christopher Mair. Thanks to you for joining me at home. If you've enjoyed this discussion, why not check out my daily On the Money show, GB News, Monday to Friday at 1 p.m. Thanks for joining me, Merry Christmas to you and your family, and all the best for 2022. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On the Money.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.